A sage sits in silence, troubled not by the world outside of him, but from the very words that rose within himself. Why had sorrow become a śloka? Why had grief taken some kind of rhythm? And why had that utterance come with the force of a curse? What happens next is one of the most sacred moments in the Ramayana, because in that very stillness, Lord Brahma himself reveals not only the meaning of that moment, but also the very purpose of the Ramayana itself. Namaste everyone, and welcome back to the Ramayana Odyssey Podcast. In this podcast, we journey through the Ramayana one story at a time, while also taking the time to reflect on the deeper meanings associated with each story. We do this in a way that is slow, reverent, and meaningful, all at the same time, so we can extract the most meaningful details for our modern day lives. So, in our previous story, we arrived at one of the most unforgettable moments in sacred literature. Maharshi Valmiki stood on the banks of the Dhamasa river. He witnessed a moment of beauty shattered in an absolute instant. A pair of birds moved together in harmony with grace, and a hunter's arrow struck one of them down in a near instant, and the other cried out in grief. From that shock, from that compassion, from that unbearable recognition of broken innocence, something entirely new arose within Valmiki. Not ordinary speech, not casual words, but measured, rhythmic, unforgettable expression, also known as the first śloka, the famous Mā Niṣāda. And yet, what made that moment even more powerful was this. Valmiki did not simply feel awe. He also felt wonder at the same time. Why had those words come through him in that specific form? Why had this sorrow taken this sort of very specific rhythm? And why had his utterance taken the form of a curse? So this is where we left with him. Not with a conclusion necessarily, but more so with a question. And today's story will begin right there. It doesn't begin with action, but actually with silence. Not with an answer, but with a sage that's willing to remain with the mystery until he is able to come into a solution. And what unfolds next is one of the most beautiful moments and important moments in the entirety of the Ramayana tradition. Because today, we enter the very moment when Lord Brahma himself appears before Maharshi Valmiki. And by doing so, he reveals not only the meaning of that utterance, but also the very purpose of the Ramayana. So let's take a moment and return back to the hermitage. The questions did not leave Valmiki. Even after returning from the Dhamasa river, they remained within him. He sat quietly in the stillness of the hermitage, allowing the whole experience around him to settle. The grieving bird, the sudden cry, the words that had risen from him before his thoughts could alter them. Again and again, his mind returned not only to what he had actually seen, but also to what he had said. Why had those words come with such force? Why had sorrow taken that specific form? Why had the utterance moved with such quiet precision, as though guided by an order that he has not created? The sound of it still echoed within him.
Mā Niṣāda pratisthām tvamagama shāsvati samāha yat kraunja midhunāt ekam avadhi kamamohitam.
It had not felt like ordinary speech. There was a measure in it. There was a rhythm in it. And there was even a strange sense of beauty, even in the sorrow from which it came from. Valmiki turned inward and wondered, how did this arise within me? He hadn't sat down to compose poetry. He didn't intend to curse. And yet grief and structure had almost emerged together in a form of compassion and consequence, feeling and form. Outside, the hermitage had grown very quiet. The chants of the disciples had faded, the sacred fires burned low, and evening moved gently across the ashrama, softening the edges of the trees and the pathways surrounding it. But Valmiki did not rush away from his question. He didn't suppress it, nor did he try to force an answer. He simply allowed it to remain in his being. And I think that's one of the most moving parts of this story, because he did not react to mystery with restlessness as most of us do in uncertainty. Rather, he responds to it with a kind of gentleness, one that's often rare to find. Gradually, his breath softened, and the movements of his mind slowed down. The thoughts in his mind had loosened its hold on him. The silence had deepened, and the world outside began to recede. The forest, the hermitage, the fading sounds of the evening, all of them seemed to dissolve into stillness. But it wasn't a stillness that felt empty. Rather, it actually felt alive. A subtle radiance began to emerge from within the silence itself. Not one that was harsh, blinding, or anything like that, but rather gentle, luminous, and peaceful. Valmiki remained absorbed in meditation as the experience deepened beyond ordinary awareness. The radiance around him continued to deepen. It didn't even appear separate from the silence. It actually seemed to arise within it, subtle, vast, and filled with an indescribable sense of peace. His awareness had become still and yet remained profoundly alert. The questions that had once moved through his mind no longer carried any sense of urgency or agitation. Rather, they now rested quietly within him, as though they were awaiting an answer greater than thought itself could carry. And then, within that luminous stillness, a presence began to slowly reveal itself. Not suddenly, not with force, but very gently, almost like a form emerging from light. Before him appeared Lord Brahma, the creative aspect of the divine, radiant and serene, seated on a lotus of brilliant splendor. He had 4 faces and was extremely luminous, and he seemed to hold within himself the majesty that is associated with creation itself. In his hands were the Vedas, the eternal wisdom from which the rhythms of existence now seemed to flow. A soft golden radiance surrounded him. It wasn't one that strained the eyes, but rather brought stillness to them. The very space around Valmiki seemed absolutely transformed in that moment. The boundaries of that hermitage, the forest, and even the sense of time itself all began to fade before that sacred presence. Valmiki felt the experience move through every part of his being. A deep reverence arose within him. Not one that's born of fear, but more so of recognition. It was as though every single discipline of his life, every struggle, every transformation, every moment of tapas had quietly prepared him for this exact moment. And yet, even before such divine brilliance, Brahma's presence carried such immense gentleness. His radiance didn't disturb silence. In fact, it deepened the silence. Valmiki beheld this divine form in reverent stillness. There was no longer any trace of confusion within him, only humility. Slowly rising from meditation, Maharshi Valmiki bowed deeply before Lord Brahma, and Lord Brahma looked upon him with a calm compassion, as one who had already known the sorrow that he had witnessed. The words that had arisen through him and the questions that still lingered silently in his heart. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The silence itself felt very sacred, so no words had to be said immediately. And then Lord Brahma began to speak. Valmiki, he said gently, the questions that move within you are not unknown to me. His voice carried neither judgment nor command. Rather, it moved with the quiet assurance of one who's seen far beyond simply surface-level events. You wonder why such words arose from you. You wonder why sorrow took the form of a curse and why that utterance emerged with such rhythm and measure. The radiance around Brahma seemed to deepen the more he spoke to Valmiki. Do not grieve over what has occurred. The incident that you had witnessed was not without purpose. What arose through you was part of a greater design. Valmiki listened in absolute stillness. And then Brahma revealed the larger vision. He goes on to say, the world knows the Vedas as the highest source of truth. Within them lies the knowledge of Dharma, the wisdom that sustains life, society, and the cosmic order itself. Yet, their depth is not easily approached by all. These Vedas are the body of revealed knowledge given to guide humanity, not only in how to live, but also how to grow, mature, and ultimately discover its highest possibility. And yet, the subtle truth associated with the Vedas is not easily understood by everyone. Not because the truth is lacking, but because life is so complex. The subtle truths of the Vedas require contemplation, discipline, and guidance. Many hear about them and understand them in theory, yet still struggle to understand how Dharma is to be lived amongst actual complexities of life. And then Brahma says something absolutely extraordinary. That is why Rama has taken birth upon the earth. His life is not merely the story of a king. It is Dharma lived through his choices, his relationships, his sacrifices, his struggles, his unwavering commitment to righteousness. Humanity will learn how Dharma is to be lived even in the most difficult moments of life. Valmiki felt these words settle in a very deep crevice of his heart. And then Brahma continued. In simple moments, it might appear very clear. But when life becomes painful, when duty conflicts with human emotions, when every path carries some sort of consequence, then Dharma becomes difficult to perceive. And it is through the life of Rama that these truths shall become visible to humanity. This line is so unbelievably important because the Ramayana is not merely telling us, oh, Rama was great. It's taking the time to show us how Dharma looks like in different situations, in joy, grief, duty, love, conflict, and loss, because all of them are relevant. Brahma continued, the Ramayana is not to exist merely as the life history of Rama and Sita. It shall become a guide for humanity, a living illustration of Dharma in daily life. And then Brahma turned directly towards Valmiki. For such a story to be preserved through generations, a new form of this expression was needed. Words alone would not be enough. The heart had to be carried within the telling itself. And at that moment, Valmiki's mind instantly returned to the utterance on the banks of the Tamasa River. That mysterious verse, that rhythm, that form. And then Brahma took the time to explain it. That is why that moment unfolded the way it did. What arose through you was no ordinary speech. By the grace of Saraswati, your sorrow had turned into a shloka. What a beautiful statement. Your sorrow had turned into a shloka. Grief did not remain grief. It turned into expression. It became a form, and it became the vehicle to carry the truth. Brahma then continued, through which Rama's life is carried into the hearts of humanity. Poetry has the power to preserve truth, awaken feeling, and remain alive across generations to come. And then came the sentence that really changed everything for Valmiki. And you, Valmiki, have been chosen for that sacred task. Valmiki listened to Brahmaji in profound stillness. Brahma's words didn't feel like instructions alone. Rather, they illuminated his entire life. Brahma looked upon him with compassion and then said, "Such a task cannot be entrusted to an unprepared mind. The story of Rama is not merely meant to be narrated. Rather, it must be revealed through a heart refined by tapas, discipline, self-study, and reverence for the truth. Because the Ramayana is not separate from the Vedic vision. The Vedas reveal the eternal truth, and the Ramayana must express that same truth through the complexities of lived human life." And then Brahma revealed something even more moving. You were not chosen by accident. The journey of your life has itself been a preparation for this moment. And at those words, it's as if Valmiki's entire past suddenly becomes meaningful. The years of ignorance, the life that was once lost in violence, the awakening, the tapas, the long refinement of the heart. Brahma then took the moment to explain. One who has never known sorrow cannot fully understand compassion. One who has never struggled within cannot guide others through the complexities of life. This is such a beautiful phrase from the Ramayana. The very struggles of one's life, when purified, essentially become qualification to guide others in a similar situation. Brahma then continued, Rama's life contains joy, sacrifice, duty, separation, conflict, and loss. To carry such a story truthfully, the heart must possess both strength and tenderness. And then he said, you have been prepared not merely to compose poetry. You have been prepared to become the voice through which Dharma shall be remembered for generations. And then the actual command was given. Therefore, Valmiki, you shall compose the life of Rama in the very form that has now arisen through you. The shloka shall become the vehicle through which this story is carried across the hearts of millions of generations. Until that moment, Valmiki had looked upon the utterance that had came from his mouth at the Tamasa river with wonder and uncertainty. Now, its purpose had become absolutely clear. The truths of Dharma must not be only understood by intellect alone. Rather, they must also reach the human heart. And through this poetic form, Rama's life would flow into the hearts of humanity with ease. Then, Brahma's voice deepened further. Narrate the life of Rama exactly as you have heard it from Maharshi Narada. And then he gave an even greater assurance to Valmiki. Nothing concerning Rama, Sita, Lakshmana, Bharata, or the others shall remain hidden from you. The events known to the world, the events unknown to the world, the outer happenings and the subtle truths behind them, all of them shall be revealed to you by my grace. And then came one of the most astonishing promises. Not a single word composed by you in this sacred work shall be untruthful. At that moment, the task was no longer mere composition. Rather, it was revelation. Compose this sacred and delightful story of Rama in the form of shlokas, Brahma said, and through it, let Dharma live in the hearts of humanity for generations to come. For a few moments after Lord Brahma had finished speaking, only silence remained. Maharshi Valmiki sat motionless before the radiant creator. The questions that had once troubled him had now completely dissolved, and in their place remained clarity, reverence, and a deep sense of sacred responsibility. And then Lord Brahma offered his blessing. As long as the mountains stand upon the earth and the rivers continue to flow, the story of the Ramayana shall live amongst humanity. These words don't sound like a wish when you read them. They sound like truth itself, like a declaration of truth. And then Brahma added, and as long as the Ramayana is remembered in this world, your name too shall live alongside it. Valmiki lowered his head deeply, not in a sense of pride, but rather in humility before grace. Then the soft radiance surrounding Lord Brahma began to slowly withdraw, not in an abrupt manner, not in a dramatic manner, but very gently, like the last glow of the sunset dissolving into the quiet of night. And yet, even as the divine form disappeared, the peace associated with him remained. The hermitage slowly returned to stillness. The distant sounds of the forest reemerged, and the evening breeze moved softly through the trees. Somewhere beyond the hermitage, the waters of the Tamasa continued their gentle flow. But within Valmiki, something had been changed forever. He no longer felt like one searching for answers. He felt like one that was entrusted with a vision. The utterance born from sorrow beside the river no longer appeared to be mysterious or foreign. Rather, it had become the doorway through which the Ramayana itself would emerge. Slowly, Maharshi Valmiki opened his eyes. Night had fully descended upon the hermitage. The forest rested beneath the moonlight. The sacred fires continued to burn softly in the distance, and a cool breeze moved through the trees. For a few moments, he remained in absolute stillness. The questions were now gone. He understood what he had to do. He understood why sorrow had become śloka, why Lord Brahma had appeared, why Rama's life needed to be preserved for humanity, and why that sacred responsibility had come to him specifically. What had begun beside the tamasa as grief and wonder had now become clarity. Valmiki lowered his gaze in quiet reverence. He felt nothing but gratitude at that moment. The bandit who had once wandered the earth in ignorance had now become the seer chosen to give a voice to Dharma through the life of Rama. Around him, the hermitage rested in deep silence. But within him, something vast had been awakened. And as the night deepened beneath the stars, Valmiki remained seated in stillness. His heart was filled with peace, humility, quiet inspiration, and the sacred anticipation of the work that awaited him with the coming dawn. And this is where we will pause for today, because this isn't just the story of Lord Brahma appearing to a sage. It's the story of a purpose being revealed in real time. It's the story of how sorrow became a śloka and how śloka became the vehicle that carries Dharma into people's hearts. It's the story of how Valmiki came to know not only what he had spoken, but also why he had spoken it. And in our next episode, we will start to see how this sacred command given by Brahma to Valmiki turns into actual action. How does Maharshi Valmiki now begin the actual composition of the Ramayana? How does the vision turn into actual verses? And how does the great epic begin to flow into the world and the hearts of so many people? We will continue that journey in the next episode. If this episode touched you and you feel like this is a meaningful journey, please help us take the message of the Ramayana to as many people as possible. Do share your thoughts with us in the YouTube comments, and do follow the Ramayana Odyssey podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And if you are listening there, please do take a moment to rate the podcast, as your support truly helps this wisdom reach more seekers. And if you are enjoying this journey, please subscribe to the Project Self YouTube channel for full episodes, reflections, and wisdom-filled conversations. Until next time, let's keep listening deeply, keep reflecting sincerely, and keep walking this sacred path together. Jai Shri Ram.